Desiree and Danielle Ward's risky plan to share a job as one person seemed like the only way out of debt. But when Desiree's feelings for their enigmatic boss, Marcus, deepen, the truth threatens to unravel everything. Can love survive their deception? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Life hadn't been easy for the Ward twins. Danielle and Desiree sat at their small kitchen table, looking at the pile of bills that seemed to grow bigger every month. The apartment they shared was tiny, with peeling wallpaper and a window that wouldn't quite close all the way, but it was all they could afford since their parents passed away. "We can't keep living like this, Des," Danielle said, pushing aside another past-due notice. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts at the diner. Desiree looked up from her laptop, where she'd been searching for yet another job. "I know, but what choice do we have? Nobody's hiring for anything that pays enough to get us out of this mess." That's when Danielle's eyes lit up with that familiar spark that always meant trouble was coming. She turned her laptop around to show her sister a news article. "Look at this. Marcus Bennett, that rich guy who never leaves his mansion, is looking for a personal assistant. The salary is incredible, Des. We're talking 6 figures. Desiree frowned. "That's great, but what does that have to do with us? Don't you see we could both do it?" Danielle leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, even though they were alone. "We're identical twins. We could take turns being his assistant. One day you, one day me. He'd never know. Have you lost your mind?" Desiree stood up, starting to pace their small living room. "That's crazy. We could get caught. We could get in trouble. We could finally pay off Dad's medical bills," Danielle interrupted softly. "We could stop eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. We could actually start living instead of just surviving." Desiree stopped pacing. Their father's illness had drained their family's savings before he passed away, leaving them with nothing but debt and memories. She looked at her sister, seeing the desperation in her eyes that matched her own. "It would never work," she said, but her voice was weaker now. "It could," Danielle insisted. "You're the organized one, the one who's good with details. I'm better at charming people and thinking on my feet. Between the two of us, we'd be the perfect assistant." "And what happens when we get caught? Because we will get caught, Danny. These things always fall apart." Danielle stood up and grabbed her sister's hands. "Maybe. But right now we're drowning, Des. We can barely keep our heads above water. Don't we deserve a chance at something better?" Desiree looked around their apartment. The second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills, the empty fridge except for condiments and cheap noodles. She thought about how tired she was of being poor, of being scared, of wondering if they'd ever catch a break. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we need rules. We need to be careful. We need to plan everything." Danielle's face lit up. "Of course, we'll write everything down, keep track of every conversation, every detail. We'll be so organized, he'll never suspect a thing." "And what about the interview? They'll probably want references, background checks. We'll use your real information," Danielle said. "You're the one with the office experience. I'll just have to learn to be you when it's my turn." They stayed up all night, planning and preparing. Desiree made detailed notes about her work history, her mannerisms, how she spoke in professional situations. Danielle practiced walking more carefully, speaking more softly, being less dramatic with her gestures. The next morning, Desiree sent in her application. 3 days later, she got a call for an interview. The Bennett mansion was exactly what you'd expect from a millionaire's home. Huge, impressive, and more than a little intimidating. Desiree's hands shook as she pressed the intercom button at the gate. "Yes?" a crisp voice answered. "Desiree Ward. I have an interview with Mr. Bennett." The gate swung open silently, and Desiree drove up the long driveway. Her old car looked out, of place among the perfectly maintained gardens and marble fountains. Front door opened before she could knock, revealing a tall, distinguished-looking man in his mid-30s. Marcus Bennett was younger than she'd expected, and more handsome than his rare photographs suggested. His dark hair was just starting to grey at the temples, and his eyes were a striking blue that seemed to look right through her. "Miss Ward," he said, his voice deep and formal. Please come in." The interview was intense. Marcus asked detailed questions about her experience, her organizational skills, her ability to handle pressure. Desiree answered honestly, mostly. She left out the part about having an identical twin who would be sharing the job. "Your references are impressive," Marcus said, looking over her resume. "But I have to ask, why are you interested in this position? It's rather isolated. Most people your age prefer more social work environments." Desiree thought carefully before answering. "I'm not most people, Mr. Bennett. I prefer quiet, focused work. And honestly, the salary would help me take care of some family obligations that are very important to me." Something in his expression softened slightly. "Family obligations?" "Medical bills," she said softly. "From my father's illness. He passed away last year." Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then he nodded. "I appreciate your honesty, Miss Ward. That's something I value highly in the people I work with." The words made her stomach twist with guilt, but she forced herself to smile. "When can you start?" he asked. Desiree blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The job. When can you start? You're offering me the position." Marcus smiled slightly. "Unless you've changed your mind." "No, yes. Desiree took a deep breath. "I can start whenever you need me to." "Monday, then. 8 a.m. sharp. Mrs. Hughes, my housekeeper, will show you around and explain your duties in detail." And just like that, it was done. The plan was in motion. Desiree drove home in a daze, her mind racing with equal parts excitement and terror. Danielle was waiting at their apartment, pacing nervously. When Desiree walked in, she pounced. "Well, what happened? Did you get it?" Desiree nodded. "I start Monday." Danielle squealed and hugged her sister tight. "I knew you could do it. This is going to change everything for us, Des. I can feel it." "Maybe," Desiree said, sinking onto their worn couch. "Or maybe we're making a huge mistake." "No negative thinking allowed," Danielle said firmly. "Now tell me everything. What's he like? What did he ask? What should I know for when it's my turn?" As Desiree described Marcus Bennett, his intensity, his questions, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her, she felt a strange flutter in her stomach. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on remembering every detail that would help them pull off their deception. That weekend, the twins prepared. They bought a simple but professional wardrobe they could share. They practiced walking and talking like each other. They created a detailed system for taking notes about every interaction, every conversation, every preference Marcus showed. "Remember," Desiree said Sunday night, "no big gestures, no flirting, no drama. We have to be consistent." I know, Danielle said, rolling her eyes. "Be boring just like you." "I'm not boring, I'm a professional." "Same thing," Danielle grinned. "But don't worry, sis. I can do professional, and you can learn to loosen up a little. This might be good for both of us." Monday morning came too. Quickly. Desiree dressed carefully in their new clothes, going over their plan one last time. "Day one is all about learning the routine," she told Danielle. "I'll take detailed notes about everything. Tomorrow you'll go in and follow the same patterns exactly." "It's going to work," Danielle said confidently. "Trust me." As Desiree drove to the Bennett mansion for her first day of work, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. But when she thought about finally being able to pay off their debts, about giving them a chance at a better life, she knew they had to try. What she didn't know, what neither twin knew, was that this deception would lead them down a path that would change all their lives forever. Because while Danielle saw Marcus Bennett as a means to an end, Desiree was already starting to see something more. Something that would complicate their perfect plan in ways they never could have imagined. The first week of the twins' deception went surprisingly smoothly. Each night they exchanged detailed notes about the day's events, conversations, and tasks. They were meticulous about maintaining consistency in their behavior and appearance. Desiree handled the organizational aspects of the job naturally. She quickly learned Marcus's filing system, his schedule preferences, and the way he liked his reports formatted. She found herself admiring his attention to detail and the quiet intelligence he showed in their brief interactions. Danielle, on her days, brought a different energy to the role. While she maintained the professional demeanor they'd agreed on, she couldn't help adding small touches of charm to her interactions with Marcus. She noticed how he seemed to relax slightly on the days she worked, though he probably didn't realize it himself. "He's not what I expected," Danielle told her sister one evening as they went over their daily exchange of information. "I thought he'd be some stuck-up rich guy, but he's actually kind of interesting." "I know what you mean," Desiree said, thinking about how Marcus had helped her carry a heavy box of files earlier that week, insisting it was no trouble. "He's different when you get to know him." The twins had developed a routine. They kept a detailed diary of every interaction, every preference, every small detail about Marcus that might be important. They noted how he liked his coffee, black, no sugar, which newspapers he read first, Wall Street Journal, then New York Times, and even which pen he preferred for signing documents, the blue Mont Blanc, never the black one. But as the weeks went by, small differences in their approaches began to emerge. When Marcus mentioned enjoying classical music one day, Desiree spent her evening researching his favorite composers so they could have an intelligent conversation about it the next time it came up. When Danielle heard about this, she downloaded some classical playlists and started playing them softly in the office, creating what she called atmosphere. "You can't do things like that without telling me," Desiree protested when she found out. "What if he notices the music only plays every other day?" "Relax," Danielle said. "He'll just think his assistant is getting more comfortable in the job. It's natural for people to show more personality over time." But Desiree worried. She noticed how Marcus seemed more open on the days Danielle worked, more willing to engage in casual conversation. On her days, he was still formal, professional, though not unkind. "Maybe we should switch," she suggested one night. "You seem to have a better rapport with him." "Are you kidding?" Danielle laughed. "You're the one who actually understands all those financial reports he's always reading." I just smile and nod and hope he doesn't ask me anything too specific. The truth was, each twin was bringing something different to the role, and Marcus was noticing, even if he didn't quite understand what he was noticing. One morning, about a month into their arrangement, Marcus surprised Desiree by asking her to join him for lunch in his study. This had never happened before, and she panicked slightly, wondering if Danielle had forgotten to tell her about a new development. "I hope you don't mind eating while we work," he said, gesturing to the sandwiches. Mrs. Hughes had prepared. "I wanted to get your thoughts on something." "Of course," Desiree said carefully, taking the seat he offered. "What can I help with?" Marcus pulled out a file she recognized. It was a proposal for a new investment in a small tech company. She had organized the research materials for it just last week. "You've read through all this?" he asked. "Yes, sir." While filing it, he smiled slightly. "What did you think?" Desiree hesitated. This wasn't part of her job description, and she wasn't sure if Danielle had already expressed an opinion about it, but when she looked at Marcus's expectant face, she decided to be honest. "I think the technology is promising," she said slowly, "but their management team seems inexperienced, and their financial projections are a bit optimistic." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Go on." Encouraged, Desiree pointed out specific concerns she'd noticed in the reports. She'd always had a head for numbers, and she'd spent extra time studying these documents, fascinated by the details of how investment decisions were made at this level. When she finished, Marcus was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That's very insightful," he said finally. "I hadn't considered some of those points." Desiree felt her face flush. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "No," he interrupted. "Don't apologize for being observant and thoughtful. Those are valuable qualities." That evening, when she told Danielle about the lunch meeting, her sister was excited. "This is perfect. He's starting to trust you. Us. The more he values our opinion, the more secure our position becomes." But Desiree wasn't so sure. The more Marcus trusted them, the worse she felt about their deception, and there was something else, something she wasn't ready to admit even to herself. She had enjoyed that lunch more than she should have. The way Marcus had listened to her, really listened, had made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. The next day was Danielle's turn, and Marcus surprised her with another lunch invitation. But this time, he wanted to discuss a charity gala he was expected to attend. "I usually avoid these events," he explained, "but my presence is expected this time. I could use your help preparing for it." Danielle, unlike her sister, was in her element. She knew exactly how these high society events worked, having researched them extensively as part of their preparation for the job. "The key is to have an exit strategy for any conversation," she explained, "and to always have a good reason to. Be somewhere else if you get cornered by someone too demanding." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, and Danielle felt a surge of triumph. She'd never heard him do that before. "You sound like you have experience with this sort of thing," he said. "Oh, you know," she said vaguely, "you pick things up here and there." When she told Desiree about it later, her sister was worried. "We can't keep having different kinds of conversations with him," she said. "He's going to notice." "Or maybe he'll just think his assistant is good at everything," Danielle countered. "Come on, Des, this is working. We're actually doing it." But that night, as Desiree lay in bed, she couldn't shake her unease. She thought about how Marcus had looked at her during their lunch, how he'd valued her opinion. Then she thought about him laughing with Danielle, opening up about his discomfort with social events. He was getting to know them, both of them, but he didn't know it. He thought he was getting to know one person, a person who didn't really exist. A person who was an impossible combination of both twins, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she wanted Marcus to know her. The real her, not the combined version she and Danielle were creating. But that was impossible. They were in too deep now, the deception too complete. All they could do was maintain the illusion and hope that when it inevitably ended, the fallout wouldn't destroy them all. What they didn't know was that the real complications were only just beginning. Because while the twins were busy maintaining their careful deception, Marcus Bennett was slowly but surely falling for his mysteriously complex assistant, and he was starting to ask questions. Marcus Bennett wasn't a man who missed details. After 2 months of working with his new assistant, he knew something wasn't quite right. He just couldn't figure out what it was. Some days, Danielle would come to work knowing exactly where every file was, anticipating his needs before he could voice them. Other days, she seemed to struggle with the filing system she'd created herself. Some days she was quiet and efficient, others she was chatty and full of energy. "There's just something different about her," he told Mrs. Hughes one morning while his assistant was out running errands. The housekeeper looked up from arranging flowers in the study. "Different how, sir?" "I can't explain it. It's like she's two different people sometimes." Mrs. Hughes smiled knowingly. "Young women are complicated, Mr. Bennett, especially the interesting ones." Marcus frowned at that. He didn't like thinking of his assistant as interesting. He'd hired her to do a job, not to intrigue him, but he couldn't deny that she did intrigue him more and more each day. Meanwhile, the twins were starting to feel the strain of their double life. Every evening, they spent hours going over the day's events, making sure they hadn't missed any details that could give them away. "He asked about the Thompson file today," Danielle said, flopping onto their couch after her shift. "I had no idea where it was." "You didn't write anything about a Thompson file in your notes?" Desiree looked up from her laptop, worried. "That's because he just mentioned it to me yesterday afternoon. I didn't have time to add it to the notes before you went in this morning." "Well, I looked like an idiot searching for it. He had to show me where it was, in the exact spot where he told you he'd put it." "This isn't working," Desiree said, running her hands through her hair. "We're missing things. We're going to get caught." "We're not going to get caught," Danielle insisted. "We just need to be more careful, more detailed in our notes." But both sisters knew they were walking a dangerous line. The more time they spent with Marcus, the harder it became to maintain their perfect coordination. The real trouble started when Marcus began to take a more personal interest in his assistant. He started asking questions about her life, her family, her interests. Questions that were harder to keep straight between the two of them. One day, while working late with Desiree, Marcus brought up a conversation he'd had with her the day before about classical music. "I've been thinking about what you said about Tchaikovsky," he said, not looking up from his computer. about how his later works showed a darker understanding of human nature. Desiree froze. She knew nothing about this conversation. Danielle hadn't mentioned anything about discussing Tchaikovsky. "Oh," she said carefully, trying to buy time. "Yes, it was quite insightful. I didn't expect you to have such a deep knowledge of classical music." "There's a lot you don't know about me," she said softly, immediately regretting the honesty in her voice. This made Marcus look up. Something in her tone caught his attention. He studied her face for a moment, and Desiree felt her heart racing. "You know what's strange?" he said slowly. "Yesterday you spoke about Tchaikovsky like a music scholar. Today you seem almost uncomfortable with the subject." "I'm just tired," Desiree said quickly. "It's been a long day." Marcus nodded, but she could tell he wasn't convinced. That night, she confronted Danielle about the conversation. "Why didn't you tell me about discussing classical music with him?" "I didn't think it was important," Danielle shrugged. "It was just small talk." "Small talk?" "Danielle, you had an entire conversation about Tchaikovsky that you didn't mention. How am I supposed to maintain our story if you keep having conversations you don't tell me about?" "I'm sorry. I can't document every single word we exchange. And anyway, you're the one who's getting too close to him." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, come on, Des. I've seen how you look at him. The way you light up when he asks your opinion about his business dealings. You're falling for him." "That's ridiculous," Desiree protested, but her face flushed. "Read, is it? Because I've read your notes. Pages and pages about every little thing he says, every smile, every time he compliments your work. That's not just being thorough. That's being smitten. You're one to talk. You're the one having deep conversations about classical music with him. That's different. I'm just playing the part, keeping him interested so we can keep this job. You're actually developing feelings for him." The worst part was Desiree couldn't deny it. Somewhere between the quiet morning coffees and late-night work sessions, between his thoughtful questions and rare smiles, she had started to care for Marcus as more than just her employer. But it wasn't just Desiree who was developing feelings. Marcus found himself thinking about his assistant more and more. He was confused by her changing moods and personalities, but something about her fascinated him. One rainy afternoon, he watched her working at her desk through his office door. She was completely focused on her work, her brow furrowed in concentration as she typed. It was one of her quiet days, the days when she seemed most real to him. "Sir?" She looked up, catching him staring. It was Desiree that day, though he didn't know it. "Sorry," he said, embarrassed at being caught. "I was just thinking about..." "What?" "About how different you seem. Sometimes. Like today, you're so focused, so precise. Other days, you're more free-spirited. It's remarkable, really." Desiree felt her heart stop for a moment. "People are complex, Mr. Bennett. We all have different sides to our personalities." "Indeed," he said thoughtfully, "but most people's different sides don't show up on alternate days." The words hung in the air between them. Desiree tried to keep her face neutral, but inside she was panicking. Had he figured it out? Was this his way of telling her he knew? But Marcus just smiled slightly and went back to his work, leaving Desiree to wonder how much longer they could keep up their charade. That evening, she told Danielle about the conversation. "He's noticing the differences between us. We need to be more careful. Or maybe we need to be less careful," Danielle said thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" "Well, if he's already noticed that his assistant has different sides to her personality, maybe we should lean into that. Make it seem intentional. People are complex, right? That's what you told him." "That's crazy," Desiree said. "The more attention we draw to our differences, the more likely he is to figure it out. Or the more likely he is to accept that his assistant is just an interesting, multifaceted person. Come on, Des. When was the last time you heard about a boss suspecting his assistant was actually identical twins taking turns? It's too crazy for him to guess." But Desiree wasn't convinced. She was starting to feel the weight of their deception, more heavily with each passing day. Every time Marcus looked at her with those piercing blue eyes, every time he asked her opinion on something important, every time he showed her small kindnesses that made her heart flutter, she felt guilty. What made it worse was that she could tell Danielle was starting to care for him too in her own way. Her sister might claim she was just playing a part, but Desiree noticed how Danielle's eyes lit up when she talked about their conversations, how she spent more time choosing her outfit on her work days, how she seemed disappointed when Marcus was too busy for their usual interactions. They were both falling for him in different ways, and he was falling for a person who didn't exist, a person who was a combination of both of them. The situation was becoming impossible. Something had to give, and then one day it did. Marcus had a habit of working late into the evening, and he expected his assistant to stay as long as needed. Usually, this wasn't a problem. The twins would simply make sure whoever was working that day was prepared for a late night. But one evening, when Danielle was supposed to be working, she got stuck in terrible traffic on her way back from running errands. She called Desiree in a panic. "I'm not going to make it back in time. Marcus has that important video conference with Tokyo at 8, and all the files he needs are in my briefcase. Can't you just tell him you're stuck in traffic? He needs those files, Des. The whole deal could fall apart if he doesn't have them for the meeting. You have to go in my place." "What? No, he just spent all day with you. He'll notice if I show up instead. He won't if you're quick. Just drop off the files and leave. Say you're not feeling well if he tries to make you stay. Please, Des, we can't mess this up." Against her better judgment, Desiree agreed. She rushed to the mansion, letting herself in with her key and hoping Marcus would be too focused on preparing for his meeting to pay much attention to her. But of course, nothing could be that simple. As she tried to slip quietly into the study, to leave the files on his desk, Marcus looked up from his computer. His eyes widened slightly. "You changed," he said. "What? Your clothes? You were wearing a blue dress earlier. Now you're in black pants." Desiree's mind raced. She hadn't thought to check what Danielle had been wearing that morning. "Oh, I spilled coffee on the dress. Had to go home and change." Marcus stood up, slowly walking around his desk. "No," he said softly. "It's more than that. You're different. Your posture, your voice. You're not the same person who was here this morning, are you?" And in that moment, looking into his searching eyes, Desiree knew their perfect plan was about to fall apart. Desiree felt like she couldn't breathe. Marcus was staring at her, waiting for an answer, and she knew there was no way to talk herself out of this one. "Mr. Bennett, I can explain," she started, but her voice was shaking. "Please do," he said quietly. His voice wasn't angry, it was worse. It was hurt. "Explain to me why my assistant seems to be two different people." Tears started forming in Desiree's eyes. Because she is." Just then, the study door burst open. Danielle rushed in, still wearing the blue dress Marcus had mentioned. She'd broken every speed limit to get there after Desiree's panicked text message. Marcus stepped back, looking between the two identical women standing in his study. "My God," he whispered. "I'm so sorry," Desiree said, the tears now falling freely. "We never meant for this to go so far." "We?" Marcus's voice was getting louder now. "So this whole time you've been, what? Taking turns pretending to be one person?" "Yes," Danielle admitted. There was no point in lying anymore. "I'm Danielle Ward. This is my sister, Desiree. We're twins." Marcus sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. How long have you been playing this game?" "Since the beginning," Desiree admitted. "The job, the salary, we needed it so badly. We have so many debts from our father's medical bills, and no one would hire either of us for enough money to make a difference. So you decided to trick me." Marcus stood up again, anger finally breaking through his shock. "To make a fool of me? Was that part of the plan too?" "No," both sisters said at once. "We never wanted to hurt you," Desiree continued. "We just wanted a chance at a better life. A better life built on lies." Marcus turned to look out the window, his back rigid with tension. "Do you have any idea how many people have tried to deceive me over the years? How many people have pretended to be something they're not, just to get close to my money?" "It wasn't like that," Danielle protested. "Not entirely, not at the end." Marcus turned back to them. "The end? This is the end, isn't it? Did you really think I could ever trust either of you again after this?" Desiree felt her heart breaking. She looked at her sister, saw the same pain reflected in Danielle's eyes. They'd known this day would come eventually, but nothing could have prepared them for how much it hurt. "You're fired," Marcus said flatly. "Both of you. I want you out of my house, and I never want to see either of you again." "Mr. Bennett, please," Desiree stepped forward. "At least let us explain everything." "Explain what? How you coordinated your deception? How you passed information back and forth, laughing at how well you were fooling me?" "We never laughed at you," Danielle said firmly. "Never. Yes, we deceived you about who we were, but everything else was real. Every conversation, every interaction, those were real." "Real?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "How can you say anything was real when I didn't even know which one of you I was talking to from one day to the next? Because we both cared," Desiree burst out. Then more quietly, "I cared. More than I should have." The room went silent. Marcus stared at her, something flickering in his eyes that might have been pain or anger or something else entirely. "Get out," he said finally. "Both of you. You'll receive your final paycheck in the mail. Never contact me again." Desiree wanted to say more, wanted to make him understand, but Danielle grabbed her arm. "Come on, Des, we need to go." They walked out of the study, out of the mansion, into the cool evening air. Neither sister spoke until they were in their car, driving away from the life they'd created and destroyed. "I'm sorry," Danielle said finally. "This is all my fault. It was my idea." "No," Desiree wiped her eyes. "I agreed to it. I could have said no." They drove home in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The apartment seemed smaller than ever. When they walked in, like all their dreams of a better life had taken up space that was now empty. "What do we do now?" Danielle asked, sitting on their worn couch. "What can we do? We go back to our old jobs if they'll still have us. We keep struggling. We survive like we always have." But both sisters knew it wasn't that simple. They'd lost more than just a job. They'd lost the chance at the life they'd dreamed of, and, in Desiree's case, she'd lost something even more precious, the possibility of love. The next few weeks were hard. They went back to their old routines, Danielle to her diner shifts, Desiree to temporary office work. But nothing felt the same. Desiree couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, about the way he looked at her when she explained something complicated, the rare times he smiled at something she said, the quiet moments when they worked late into the evening and everything felt peaceful and right. Danielle noticed her sister's sadness. "You really did fall for him, didn't you? Does it matter now? He hates us both. Maybe? Not forever. Maybe if we wrote him a letter, explained everything properly." "No," Desiree said firmly. "He was clear. He never wants to see us again." But fate had other plans. 3 weeks after their dramatic revelation, Desiree was working at a temporary job in an office downtown when she literally ran into Marcus coming out of a coffee shop. Her papers went flying everywhere. Without thinking, Marcus knelt to help her pick them up, then froze when he recognized her. "I'm sorry," Desiree said, quickly gathering her papers. "I'll go." "Wait," Marcus said, surprising them both. "Which one are you?" "Desiree," she said softly. "The quiet one, the one who actually understood those financial reports." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then vanished. "You broke my trust," he said. "I know. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." She stood up, clutching her papers to her chest. "But I meant what I said that night. I did care. More than I should have. More than was professional. More than was fair, given our deception. But my feelings for you were real, Marcus. They still are." She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. "I've been thinking about you," he said. "Both of you, I suppose. Trying to separate my memories, figure out which twin I was talking to when. It's strange. I can tell now. The quiet days, the thoughtful conversations about business and books, that was you, wasn't it?" "Yes," Desiree whispered. "And the music discussions, the social advice, that was Danielle?" "Yes. We're very different people, despite looking identical." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's what's been driving me crazy these past weeks. I fell in love with my assistant, but my assistant was two people. How is that possible? How can I have feelings for someone who doesn't really exist?" Desiree's heart skipped at the word love, even though she knew he wasn't really saying he loved her. "Maybe," Maybe you were drawn to different things in each of us. Maybe you need to figure out which parts really mattered to you. Maybe, he said thoughtfully. Then his professional mask slipped back into place. I should go, I have a meeting. Of course. Desiree turned to leave again. Desiree, he called after her. Thank you, for being honest now at least. She nodded and walked away, her heart pounding. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to the relationship she'd dreamed of, but it was something. A crack in the wall of anger he'd built around himself. When she told Danielle about the encounter that evening, her sister was excited. See? He's thinking about us, about you, specifically. This could be your chance. My chance for what? He said he was in love with someone who doesn't exist. No, he said he fell in love with his assistant, and then he specifically separated out the things that were you. The quiet days, the business talks. He remembered those specifically. It doesn't matter, Desiree said. But her heart wasn't. In the denial. We broke his trust. You can't build a relationship on that. Maybe not, Danielle agreed. But you can build a new relationship on honesty, on being yourself completely and truly, and letting him decide if that's someone he wants to know. Desiree thought about it all night. About Marcus's words, about the look in his eyes when he'd helped her with her papers, about the fact that he'd bothered to separate his memories of the twins in his mind. The next morning, she made a decision. She sat down at their small kitchen table and began to write. Dear Marcus, I owe you the complete truth, not just about the deception, but about everything. About who I am, about why we did what we did, and about how I feel. You may never want to see me again after reading this, and I'll understand if that's your choice. But before you make that, Joyce, please let me tell you my story. Marcus sat in his study holding Desiree's letter. He'd read it 3 times already, but he kept coming back to certain parts. Our father got sick when we were in college, cancer. We dropped out to take care of him, used all our savings for his treatment. When he died, we were left with nothing but debt and grief. Danielle came up with the plan to share your job because she saw how desperate I was getting. I was working 3 jobs and still couldn't keep up with the bills. She's always been the one to take action, to find solutions, even if they're crazy ones. I was the careful one, the worried one. But I was also tired of being poor, of being scared all the time. The first time you asked my opinion about a business matter, I was terrified of saying the wrong thing. But you listened to me like what I had to say mattered. No one had ever done that before. That's when I started falling for you. Not because of your money or your position, but because you saw me, really saw me, even though you didn't know who I really was. Danielle and I are different people who happen to look alike. She's bold and creative, always ready for an adventure. I'm quieter, more analytical. She brought music and energy to your office, while I brought organization and attention to detail. You got to know both of us, even though you thought we were one person. But the person you got to know wasn't fake, she was just incomplete. You never got the chance to know either of us fully, honestly. Mrs. Hughes knocked on the study door, bringing in his evening coffee. She noticed the letter in his hands. Still thinking about those twins, sir? Marcus looked up, surprised. You knew? The housekeeper smiled. I had my suspicions. Some days your assistant would ask where things were kept that she'd put away herself the day before, and the way she took her tea changed, some days with sugar, some days without. Why didn't you say anything? It wasn't my place. Besides, I could see how much happier you were with her, with them around. You smiled more in those few months than you had in all the years I've worked here. Marcus sat back in his chair, thinking about those months. He remembered the quiet moments with Desiree, discussing business strategies late into the evening. He remembered Danielle's infectious energy, how she made him laugh with her clever observations about people at charity events. They lied to me, he said, but his voice lacked the anger it had held before. Yes, they did, Mrs. Hughes agreed. But sometimes people do wrong things for right reasons. The question is, can you forgive them, or at least one of them? Marcus looked at the letter. Again. At the bottom, Desiree had written her phone number and a simple request. If you want to talk, really talk, just call. I promise to tell you nothing but the truth from now on. Meanwhile, across town, Desiree was trying not to think about the letter. She'd dropped it off at Marcus's house 3 days ago and hadn't heard anything. Danielle kept telling her to be patient, but patience had never been harder. "At least we're catching up on the bills," Danielle said, trying to cheer her sister up. "That temp agency really likes you." "Yeah," Desiree said without enthusiasm. The work was fine, but after working with Marcus, everything else felt empty. Her phone rang, making both sisters jump. It was an unknown number. "Answer it," Danielle whispered urgently. Desiree's hands shook as she picked up the phone. "Hello? Desiree?" Marcus's voice, her heart stopped. "I read your letter." "Oh." She tried to keep her voice steady. "All of it?" "Several times." He paused. "I'd like to talk in person. Are you free for dinner tomorrow night?" Desiree looked at Danielle, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "Yes, I'm free." "Good. I'll send a car to pick you up at 7. And Desiree, just you, not Danielle." "Of course, just me." After she hung up, Danielle hugged her tightly. "This is your chance. You can finally be yourself with him. Or he just wants to tell me in person never to contact him again. Don't be silly. Men don't send cars and arrange dinner just to say goodbye." The next evening, Desiree spent hours getting ready. For the first time, she didn't have to worry about choosing clothes that would also work for Danielle. She picked a simple blue dress that made her feel confident and styled her hair the way she liked it, not the way they'd agreed upon for work. The car arrived exactly at 7. The drive to Marcus's mansion felt both too long and too short. When she arrived, Mrs. Hughes met her at the door with a warm smile. "He's waiting for you in the garden," the housekeeper said. "And dear, I'm glad you're here as yourself this time." The garden was lit with small lanterns, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. Marcus stood when he saw her approach, and Desiree's breath caught. He looked as handsome as ever in his casual evening clothes. "You look different," he said as she sat down. "But the same too. It's confusing. I imagine a lot of things are confusing right now, yes." He poured her a glass of wine. "I have questions. I'll answer anything you ask, completely honestly." "Good." He took a sip of his own wine. "First question. That day we discussed the Thompson investment. Was that you or Danielle?" "Me. I've always loved analyzing business. Proposals. Danielle used to tease me about reading financial magazines for fun." A small smile touched his lips. "And the classical music discussion? About Tchaikovsky?" That was Danielle. She spent hours researching classical music because she noticed you had symphony programs in your study. I suspected as much. She was passionate about the music, but didn't seem to understand the business implications of the composer's later works, which I mentioned the next day. Desiree blushed. That's when I knew we were in trouble. I couldn't maintain the conversation because I hadn't known about it. "You know what's strange?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Looking back, I can see the differences so clearly now. The days when my assistant was quiet but insightful, deeply understanding complex business issues. And the days when she was charming and energetic, making everything feel lighter. I thought I was falling for someone with an amazingly complex personality. Instead, you were falling for two different people," Desiree finished quietly. "Yes. But here's what I've realized, reading your letter and thinking about those months. The person I connected with most deeply, the one I looked forward to seeing, was you, Desiree. The quiet days were my favorite days." Her heart started beating. "Faster." "Marcus, let me finish. What you and your sister did was wrong. You broke my trust, played with my emotions. It hurt to discover the truth." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But I understand why you did it, and I think maybe we can start over. No lies, no deceptions. Just you and me, getting to know each other properly this time." Tears filled Desiree's eyes. "I'd like that. More than anything." "I have one condition," Marcus said, his thumb gently stroking her hand. "Complete honesty from now on about everything." "I promise," Desiree whispered. "No more secrets." "Good. Then let's start with an honest dinner. Tell me about yourself. The real you. not the combination of you and your sister I got to know before. As they talked through dinner, Desiree felt herself truly relaxing for the first time in months. She told Marcus about her love of mathematics, about her dream of going back to college someday to finish her business degree, about how she and Danielle had supported each other through their father's illness. Marcus, in turn, opened up about his own past, about losing his parents young, about building his business empire to prove himself, about how lonely it had been at the top. "I think that's why your deception hurt so much," he admitted. "I thought I'd finally found someone who saw me as more than just my money and position. Then I discovered it was all a lie." "Not all of it," Desiree said firmly. "My feelings for you were real. Are real." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked around the table, pulling her to her feet. "I'd like to kiss you," he said softly. "Just you, Desiree. No confusion about who I'm kissing this time." When his lips met hers, Desiree felt like her heart might burst. This was nothing like the guilt-ridden kiss they'd shared before, when she'd been pretending to be someone else. This was real, honest, true. Later that night, when the car dropped her off at her apartment, Danielle was waiting up for her. "Well," her sister demanded, "how did it go?" Desiree touched her lips, still feeling Marcus's kiss. "It went wonderfully. He wants to start over, with just me this time." Danielle hugged her tightly. "I'm so happy for you, and a little jealous, if I'm being honest. Not of Marcus specifically, but of finding someone who accepts you completely." "You will too," Desiree assured her. "And when you do, it will be as yourself, not as part of our twin act." As she lay in bed that night, Desiree thought about how differently things had turned out from their original plan. They'd started with a scheme to share a job, to escape poverty. Instead, they'd learned important lessons about honesty, about being true to themselves, and about love. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. Looking forward to getting to know the real you better. A dinner again tomorrow?" Desiree smiled as she typed her reply. "Yes, just me this time, promise." The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time it was also full of hope. And this time that hope was built on truth, not deception. 3 months had passed since that first honest dinner in Marcus's garden. Desiree and Marcus had been dating properly, getting to know each other without any secrets between them. But it hadn't all been smooth sailing. "I don't know why you won't let me help with the medical bills," Marcus said one evening as they sat in his study. "You're struggling to pay them, and I have more money than I could ever spend." "Because I need to do this myself," Desiree insisted. "I can't have you solve all our problems with your checkbook. It wouldn't be right." Marcus ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. "What's not right is watching you work yourself to exhaustion at that temp agency when I could fix everything with one phone call." "Marcus," Desiree took his hand, "I love that you want to help, but Danielle and I got ourselves into this mess. We need to get ourselves out of it." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You're stubborn, you know that? That's why you love me." The words slipped out before she could stop them. They hadn't said love yet, not officially. Desiree felt Marcus stiffen slightly. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." She looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Yes? Yes, I love you, the real you, Desiree Ward. Not the combined version of you and your sister I thought I knew before, but you. Just you." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too. I have for so long, even when I couldn't say it." Meanwhile, Danielle was going through changes of her own. Without the pressure of pretending to be her sister half the time, she'd finally admitted what she really wanted to do with her life. "I'm going to start teaching music lessons," she told Desiree one morning. "All that research I did about classical music for Marcus, it reminded me how much I loved playing piano when we were kids, before Dad got sick and we had to sell the piano. But can you make enough money doing that? I already have 5 students lined up from the diner, parents who heard me talking about music and asked if I could teach their kids." Danielle grinned. "Turns out all those hours studying composers wasn't wasted after all." Desiree hugged her sister. "I'm so proud of you. You're finally doing something that's just for you, not part of our twin act." "Speaking of the twin act," Danielle said hesitantly, "Marcus called me yesterday." What? Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to think about what he said first. Danielle sat down at their kitchen table. He offered to help me set up a proper music studio, said he knows I won't take his money directly, but he'd be willing to invest in my business, as a legitimate business partner, not charity. Oh. Desiree sat down too. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. What do you think I should do? Desiree was quiet for a moment. I think you should do what feels right to you, not what you think I want or what you think you deserve, just what feels right. Danielle nodded slowly. I want to do it, but I want to do it properly. Write up a real business plan, make it a legitimate investment. No more shortcuts or schemes. I think that's wise, a deep voice said from the doorway. Both sisters turned to see Marcus standing there with a bouquet of flowers. Sorry, the door was open, and I couldn't help overhearing. Danielle stood up awkwardly. I should go, let you two have some privacy. Actually, Marcus said, I'd like to talk to both of you about the future. He sat down at the table with them, taking Desiree's hand. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about trust, about forgiveness, about family. What you two did, switching places, deceiving me, it was wrong. But I understand now that you did it out of love for each other, out of desperation to help your family. He looked at Danielle. You were willing to do anything to help your sister, to give her a chance at a better life. That kind of loyalty, while misguided, is admirable. Then he turned to Desiree. And you, my love, have shown me that people can change, that trust can be rebuilt, that honesty and love are worth fighting for. What are you saying? Desiree asked softly. Marcus pulled out a small velvet box. Both sisters gasped. I'm saying that I want to marry you, Desiree Ward. I want to build a life with you, help you achieve your dreams of finishing your business degree, maybe even work together someday if you want. But I also understand that you're a package deal. You and your sister have been through too much together to ever truly be separated. He opened the box, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. So, I'm not just asking you to marry me. I'm asking to become part of your family, to help both of you achieve your dreams, you with your business ambitions, Danielle with her music studio, not as charity, but as family helping family. Tears were streaming down Desiree's face. Marcus, let me finish. Danielle, I want to be clear. My offer to invest in your music studio stands regardless of what your sister says. It's not contingent on her answer. It's me acknowledging that you're talented and dedicated, and that your dream deserves a chance. Danielle was crying too now. Thank you, she whispered. Marcus turned back to Desiree. So, my love, what do you say? Will you marry me? Let me be part of your family. Help both of you build the lives you deserve? Desiree looked at the ring, then at her sister. Danielle nodded, smiling through her tears. Yes, Desiree said, turning back to Marcus. Yes to everything. As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her in for a kiss, Desiree felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They had started this journey with a deception, a desperate plan to share a job. They were ending it with something far more precious, genuine love, honest success, and a family made stronger by forgiveness and truth. Later that night, after Marcus had left and the sisters were alone, Danielle hugged Desiree tight. You know what's funny, she said. When we started all this, we thought we were just sharing a job. We never imagined we'd end up sharing a whole new life. Are you really okay with all this? Desiree asked. With me marrying Marcus, with taking his investment? More than okay. For the first time in our lives, we don't have to pretend to be the same person. We can be ourselves. You with your business dreams, me with my music, and we'll still be sisters, still be there for each other. Just honestly this time. Desiree touched the ring on her finger, still hardly believing it was real. Do you think Dad would be proud of us even after everything we did? I think he'd be proud of who we've become, Danielle said softly. Not of the deception, but of how we've grown from it, how we've learned to be true to ourselves. The next morning, Desiree woke up early and went to stand by their apartment window. The city was just waking up, the rising sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, She would go to her temp job for the last time. Marcus had insisted on paying off their remaining debts as an engagement gift, and she had finally accepted. Not as charity, but as a fresh start for their new life together. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Good morning, future Mrs. Bennet. Still can't believe you said yes." She smiled as she typed back, "Good morning, future husband. Still can't believe you asked." From the kitchen, she could hear Danielle practicing scales on the small keyboard she'd bought second-hand. Her sister was already preparing for her first official music lessons, determined to make her studio a success through hard work and honest effort. Everything was different now, yet somehow exactly as it should be. They had started with a scheme, born of desperation, but they were ending with something much more valuable: real love, genuine success, and a family bound together not by deception, but by truth and forgiveness. As Desiree stood there, watching the sun rise on their new life, she thought about how sometimes the wrong path could lead you to exactly the right destination. She and Danielle had taken a huge risk, made terrible mistakes, but through it all, they had found their way to where they were meant to be. Marcus was right. They were a package deal, the Ward twins. But now they could be a package deal, honestly, each living their own life while supporting each other. And with Marcus's love and support, those lives were going to be more amazing than they had ever dreamed possible. Planning a wedding was nothing like what Desiree had imagined when she was a little girl. Sitting in the massive ballroom of Marcus's mansion, surrounded by wedding magazines and sample invitations, she felt overwhelmed. "What about this one?" Mrs. Hughes asked, holding up another invitation sample with gold lettering. "It's beautiful," Desiree said automatically, then caught herself. "But it's not really me, is it? It's too flashy." Marcus, who had been watching from the doorway, came to sit beside her. "Then what is you?" "Something simpler, elegant but not showy." She picked up a cream-colored invitation with simple black script. "Like this one?" "Then that's what we'll have." Marcus kissed her temple. "This is your wedding, my love. Here it should reflect who you are, not what people expect from Marcus Bennett's bride." The word bride still made Desiree's heart flutter. Sometimes she could hardly believe this was real, that she was actually marrying Marcus, that their life together was beginning without any lies between them. Meanwhile, Danielle was throwing herself into her new music studio. Marcus had helped her rent a small space downtown and fill it with quality instruments. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and children's artwork was already starting to decorate the space. "You should see them, Des," Danielle said excitedly, one evening. "These kids, they light up when they learn something new. When they finally master a difficult piece, their faces just glow. I never knew teaching could feel this good." "Better than pretending to be me," Desiree teased. "So much. Farah, this is real, this is me." Danielle paused. "I have something to tell you. I met someone." Desiree sat up straight. "What? Who?" "His name is James. He brings his daughter for piano lessons. He's a widower, and he's really nice, Des. We've been getting coffee after her lessons." "Why? Didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted to be sure it was real. After everything that happened with Marcus and the deception, I wanted my first real relationship to be completely honest from the start." Desiree hugged her sister. "I'm so happy for you. Does he know about everything?" "Yes, I told him about the twin switch, about why we did it. He said he admired our loyalty to each other, even if we went about it the wrong way. And he said he's glad I found my true calling with music." The wedding preparations continued. Marcus insisted on hiring the best wedding planner in the city, but Desiree kept things simpler than anyone expected. She chose wildflowers over exotic blooms, elegant but understated decorations, and a menu that included some of her and Danielle's father's favorite dishes. "Are you sure you don't want something more elaborate?" the wedding planner asked, clearly thinking of Marcus's wealth. "I'm sure," Desiree said firmly. "This wedding isn't about showing off Marcus's money. It's about love and family and truth." One afternoon, while trying on her wedding dress, Desiree got an unexpected visitor. Marcus's brother, Richard, appeared at the bridal shop. "Miss Ward," he said formally. May we talk? Desiree's heart raced. Richard had been openly skeptical about their relationship, especially after learning about the twin deception. Of course, she said, sitting down in her wedding dress. I've been watching you these past months, Richard said. Watching how you've refused to take advantage of my brother's wealth. How you've encouraged your sister to build her own business honestly. How you've planned this wedding with taste and restraint. I love Marcus, Desiree said simply. Not his money. I'm beginning to see that. Richard smiled slightly. You know, when Marcus told me about the twin switch, I thought you were just another gold digger with a clever scheme, but you're actually making my brother happier than I've ever seen him, and you're doing it by being yourself, not by pretending to be what you think he wants. Tears formed in Desiree's eyes. Thank you, that means a lot. I have something for you. Richard pulled out an old velvet box. This was our mother's. Marcus doesn't know I have it. Dad gave it to me for safekeeping before he died. I think Mom would have wanted you to have it. Inside was a beautiful pearl necklace. Simple, elegant, classic. It's perfect, Desiree whispered. Just promise me one thing, Richard said. Keep being real with him. My brother has had enough fake people in his life. I promise. No more pretending, ever. That evening, Desiree and Marcus had dinner in his garden, where they'd had their first honest date. The lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over everything. Penny, for your thoughts? Marcus asked, noticing her distant expression. I was just thinking about how far we've come, from that crazy scheme Danielle cooked up, to this. Sometimes I still feel guilty about how it started. Don't, Marcus took her hand. Yes, the deception was wrong, but look what came from it. You and Danielle both found your true paths. You found the courage to be yourselves, and I found the love of my life. The real you, not the combined version I thought I knew before. Have I told you today that I love you? Desiree smiled. Yes, but I never tire of hearing it. Inside the house they could hear piano music. Danielle was giving James's daughter her lesson, while James watched with obvious admiration for both the teacher and the music. Your sister's really found her calling, Marcus observed. We both have, Desiree said. I start business school next semester, thanks to you. Thanks to yourself, Marcus corrected. I'm just providing the opportunity. You're the one who's going to do all the hard work. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the piano music drift through the evening air. Everything felt right, peaceful, true. Later that night, as Desiree got ready for bed in what would soon be their shared bedroom, she found a note from Marcus on her pillow. My dearest Desiree, tomorrow we have the final wedding tasting, and I know you'll choose something. Perfect, because you always do. But before we get caught up in another day of planning, I wanted to tell you something. I'm grateful for your deception, not because it was right. We both know it wasn't, but because it brought you into my life. Because it taught us both valuable lessons about honesty, about being true to ourselves, about what really matters in life. You could have tried to keep taking advantage of my wealth after I discovered the truth. Instead, you chose the harder path. You chose to rebuild trust, to prove yourself, to be genuinely you. That's when I knew you were the one I wanted to spend my life with. I love you, Desiree Ward. The real you. The you who analyzes business proposals. For fun. Who chooses simple elegance over flash. Who puts family first but isn't afraid to be her own person. In 2 weeks, you'll be my wife, and I can't wait to begin our honest life together. All my love, Marcus. Desiree held the note to her, heart tears of joy rolling down her cheeks. Yes, their beginning had been built on lies, but their future would be built on nothing but truth, and that made all the difference in the world. From down the hall, she could still hear Danielle's piano music, now playing something soft and romantic. Her sister had found her own path, her own love story, her own truth. They were still close, still sisters, still each other's biggest supporters. But now they were supporting each other's real dreams, not a shared deception. The Ward twins had started their journey trying to share one life. Instead, they had found the courage to live 2 separate but equally beautiful lives, connected by love, truth, and the unbreakable bond of family. As Desiree drifted off to sleep, Marcus's note tucked under her pillow, she smiled. Sometimes the best endings came from the most complicated beginnings. And their ending was turning out to be more perfect than any fairy tale, because it was real, honest, and true. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Desiree stood at the window of the bridal suite in Marcus's mansion, watching the garden being transformed for the ceremony. White chairs were being set up in neat rows, and flowers were being arranged along the aisle where she would walk to meet her future husband. "Stop biting your nails," Danielle scolded, coming up behind her. "You'll ruin your manicure." "I'm nervous," Desiree admitted. "What if—" "Don't you dare start with the what-ifs," Danielle interrupted. "You deserve this happiness. You and Marcus both do." The sisters looked at each other in the mirror as the hairstylist worked on Desiree's updo. For once, they didn't look identical. Danielle had chosen a different hairstyle for her maid of honor role, wanting to make sure no one confused them on this important day. "Remember when we used to switch places in high school?" Danielle asked, smiling at the memory. "For tests and dates?" "We thought we were so clever," Desiree laughed. "But this is different now. Today, I want to be absolutely, completely myself." There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hughes entered with a small package. "This just came from Mr. Bennett for the bride." Desiree opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a beautiful sapphire bracelet and a note. "My dearest Desiree, this belonged to my grandmother. She always said that true love, like a sapphire, should be both beautiful and unbreakable. Our love started with complications, but it grew into something real and strong. I can't wait to see you walk down the aisle. All my love, Marcus." "Don't you dare cry," Danielle warned as tears filled her sister's eyes. "We just finished your makeup." Another knock at the door revealed James, Danielle's boyfriend, with his daughter Katie. "Special delivery," James smiled. "Katie wanted to give you something before the ceremony." The little girl stepped forward shyly, holding out a handmade card. Inside, she had drawn a picture of Desiree in a wedding dress and written, "Thank you for sharing your sister with us. She's the best piano teacher ever." This time, Desiree couldn't hold back the tears. She hugged Katie tight. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm so glad Danielle found you and your dad." James wrapped an arm around Danielle's waist. "So am I," he said softly. The morning passed in a blur of final preparations. Before Desiree knew it, it was time to put on her wedding dress. She had chosen something simple but elegant, a fitted silk gown with delicate lace details. "Look beautiful," Danielle whispered, helping her with the buttons. "Like a real princess." "Not a princess," Desiree corrected. "Just me, finally, completely me." Richard appeared at the door. Since the sisters had no father to give the bride away, Marcus's brother had offered to do the honors. "It's time," he said, then paused, looking at Desiree. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but you're the best thing that's ever happened to my brother." In the garden, guests were seated and music was playing softly. Marcus stood at the altar, looking handsome, in his tuxedo. When the wedding march began and he turned to see Desiree walking toward him on Richard's arm, his eyes filled with tears. Halfway down the aisle, Desiree caught sight of the small table she had insisted on placing near the altar. On it sat a framed photo of her father, along with his favorite flowers. He might not be there physically, but she could feel his presence, his love. The ceremony was everything Desiree had dreamed of: simple, meaningful, true. When it came time for the vows, Marcus went first. "Desiree Ward, our story began with confusion and complications, but through all of that, I fell in love with you, the real you, your intelligence, your kindness, your determination to do what's right even when it's hard. Today, I promise to love and cherish you, to support your dreams and to always be honest with you, just as you have learned to be honest with me. You are my perfect match, my true love, my future." Desiree's voice shook as she spoke her vows. "Marcus Bennett, you taught me the true meaning of love. Not just romantic love, but love that forgives, that understands, that helps us grow. When you discovered our deception, you could have turned away. Instead, you gave me the chance to show you who I really am. Today, I promise to always be that person, honest, true, and completely in love with you. I promise to be your partner, your support, and your faithful wife all the days of our lives." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus's kiss was sweet and tender. The gathered guests burst into applause, but Desiree hardly heard them. All she could focus on was her husband's loving smile. At the reception, Danielle gave a maid of honor speech that had everyone alternately laughing and crying. "My sister and I have been together since before we were born. We've shared everything, clothes, secrets, even an identity for a while there." This earned knowing chuckles from the guests who had heard the story. But today I'm so proud to see her sharing her life with Marcus as her true, authentic self. Des, you've always been the sensible one, the careful one, the one who tried to talk me out of my crazy schemes. I'm so glad you went along with just one of them, because it led you to this happiness. Marcus, thank you for seeing my sister for who she really is, and for loving her enough to forgive how you found her. You're not just gaining a wife today, you're gaining a whole family, crazy twin sister included. The evening was magical. Marcus and Desiree shared their first dance to a piece that Danielle had composed especially for them, playing it live on the grand piano. James sat beside her, turning pages and looking at her with pure adoration. As the night went on, Desiree found quiet moments to really take in her happiness. She watched Danielle teaching Katie a simple dance step, while James looked on with love. She saw Mrs. Hughes wiping away tears as she arranged the flowers on the cake table. She caught Richard showing his wife old family photos, pointing out how much his mother's smile looked like Desiree's. Marcus found her during one of these quiet moments. "Happy, Mrs. Bennet?" "More than I ever thought possible," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Thank you for loving me even after everything." "Thank you for becoming who you really are," he replied. "For being brave enough to be honest, to be yourself." They looked out over their gathered loved ones, family by blood and by choice. The garden was lit with thousands of tiny lights, making everything glow like a fairy tale. But this was better than a fairy tale, Desiree thought. This was real. This was true. This was the beginning of her honest, authentic life with the man she loved. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus squeezed her hand. "Ready to start our new chapter?" Desiree looked up at her husband, her heart full of love and gratitude. "More than ready. As long as we're together and as long as we're true to ourselves, I'm ready for anything." The music played on, the stars twinkled above, and two people who had found each other through deception but stayed together through truth celebrated the beginning of their honest, loving future. The Italian coast was even more beautiful than Desiree had imagined. Standing on the balcony of their honeymoon suite in Positano, she watched the sunset paint the Mediterranean Sea in shades of gold and pink. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Bennet?" Marcus asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from a year ago," she said, leaning back against him. "Last year, Danielle and I were sharing a tiny apartment and barely making ends meet. Now I'm here, married to you, starting business school in the fall." Having second thoughts? There was a trace of worry in his voice. Desiree turned to face him. "Never. I love our life together. I love that it's real, that we don't have any secrets between us." Back home, Danielle was building her own happiness. Her music studio was thriving, with a waiting list of students wanting to learn from her. But more importantly, her relationship with James was growing stronger every day. One evening, while giving Katie an extra piano lesson, Danielle got a surprise. The little girl was practicing a new piece when James walked in with a serious expression. "Katie, honey, remember what we talked about?" he said. Katie nodded excitedly and started playing a different song, one that Danielle recognized as "Marry You" by Bruno Mars. When she turned around, James was down on one knee, holding a ring. "Danielle, Ward," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You came into our lives pretending to be someone else. But the woman I fell in love with is exactly who you really are. Talented, caring, and absolutely perfect for us. Will you marry me? Be Katie's mum and my wife?" Through her tears, Danielle managed to say yes. Katie rushed to hug them both, creating a perfect family moment. When she called Desiree in Italy to share the news, both sisters cried happy tears. "I wish I was there to hug you," Desiree said. "You'll be back for the wedding," Danielle assured her. "We're thinking of having it in the spring. A small ceremony, nothing fancy, just family and close friends. Are you happy, Danny? Really happy? Happier than I've ever been. And it's all because I finally learned to be myself, not half of a twin." Act. Meanwhile, Marcus and Desiree were making the most of their honeymoon. They explored ancient ruins, ate at tiny local restaurants, and spent long evenings talking about their future. "I want to show you something," Marcus said one night, pulling out his laptop. "So I've been working on this for a while." He opened a document titled Bennett Enterprises Restructuring Plan. As Desiree read through it, her eyes widened. "Marcus, this is brilliant. Splitting the company into smaller, specialized divisions would make everything more efficient." "Keep reading," he encouraged. She scrolled down and gasped. There, in black and white, was a proposal to create a new division focused on arts education and community development, with Danielle's music studio as its flagship program. You want to expand her studio, if she wants to. The plan would provide funding for music education in underprivileged areas, scholarships for talented students who can't afford lessons, even a small performance venue, but only if Danielle agrees, and only if she wants to run it herself, her way. Desiree kissed him deeply. "You're an amazing man, Marcus Bennett. I just want our family to be happy. All of our family." When they returned from their honeymoon, life settled into a new routine. Desiree started her business classes, throwing herself into learning everything she could about corporate management and finance. Marcus made sure their home office had space for both of them, proud to see his wife developing her natural business talents. One evening, about a month after their return, they hosted a family dinner. Danielle and James were there with Katie, who proudly showed off her new engagement ring to anyone who would look. Richard and his wife came, bringing photos from a family album they'd found in the attic. As Desiree looked around the table, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Here was her family, not just Danielle, but all of them. Marcus, who had learned to trust again. Richard, who had become the protective big brother she never had. James and Katie, who made her sister's eyes shine with joy. Even Mrs. Hughes, who had known their secret all along, but had seen the love growing beneath the deception. After dinner, Danielle pulled her aside. "I have something to tell you," she said nervously. "Something big." "You're pregnant," Desiree guessed. "How did you know?" "Twin intuition," Desiree laughed, hugging her sister. "Plus, you turned down wine at dinner, which never happens." "I haven't told James yet," Danielle admitted. "I wanted you to be the first to know. Well, the second, after the doctor. He's going to be so happy, Danny, you all are. I know, it's just everything's changing so fast. Sometimes I worry it's too good to be true." "It's true because it's real," Desiree said firmly. "No more pretending, no more schemes, just us living our best lives." Later that night, Marcus found Desiree in their home office, looking at old photos of her and Danielle as children. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Better than okay," she smiled. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. Remember when you first found out about our deception? You were so angry, so hurt." "I remember. But I also remember not being able to stay. Angry because underneath all the confusion and hurt, I knew I loved you, the real you. And now look at us, married, happy, building our future together. Danielle and James getting married in the spring, a baby on the way." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "A baby?" "Oops," Desiree giggled. "That was supposed to be a secret. Don't tell James. Danielle wants to tell him herself." "Our family's growing," Marcus said softly, pulling her close. "All because two desperate sisters hatched a crazy plan to share a job. Do you ever regret it? Falling in love with someone who started out deceiving you?" "Never. Because that deception led to the most honest love I've ever known." He kissed her gently. "And speaking of honest love, I have something to tell you too." "Oh, Mrs. Hughes mentioned you've been feeling tired lately, and that you've been skipping your morning coffee." Desiree's eyes widened. "You don't think—" "I think—" "We should call your doctor in the morning," Marcus smiled. Our family might be growing even faster than we thought. Desiree touched her stomach, hardly daring to hope. Twins run in my family, you know. God help us, Marcus laughed, but his eyes were shining with joy. They stood together at the window, looking out over the garden where they'd been married just months ago. Everything had changed since that first day Desiree had come for a job interview, planning to share the position with her sister. But all the changes had led them here to this moment, to this happiness. I love you, Desiree whispered, the real me loving the real you. I love you too, Marcus replied, all of you, exactly as you are. Outside, the stars twinkled in the clear night sky, witnesses to a love story that had begun with deception but had grown into something true, deep, and eternal. The garden of the Bennett mansion was once again filled with chairs and flowers, but this time for a different celebration. Desiree sat in the front row, holding her infant son Michael, while Marcus stood at the altar as best man. They were all gathered for Danielle and James's wedding day. Your sister looks beautiful, Marcus whispered as Danielle walked down the aisle in a flowing white dress, her small baby bump just beginning to show. Katie walked ahead of her, scattering rose petals and beaming with pride at her role as flower girl. She looks happy, Desiree corrected softly. That's what makes her beautiful. The past year had brought so many changes to their lives. Desiree had excelled in her business classes and was now helping Marcus run certain divisions of Bennett Enterprises. Her natural talent for numbers and strategy had proven invaluable, and the board members who had once looked at her with suspicion now sought out her opinions. Danielle's music program had grown beyond anyone's expectations. With Marcus's investment and support, she had opened 3 more studios across the city, providing music education to children who couldn't otherwise afford it. Her wedding gift from Marcus and Desiree was her own building downtown, a beautiful, old theater converted into a music school and performance space. As the minister began the ceremony, Desiree looked down at little Michael sleeping in her arms. He had his father's dark hair and her eyes, a perfect blend of them both, just like her life had become a perfect blend of her past and present, the struggling girl who had once been desperate enough to share a job with her twin, and the confident woman who now helped run a corporation while raising her son. Do you, James Mitchell, take Danielle Ward to be your lawfully wedded wife? The minister asked. I do, James said firmly, his eyes never leaving Danielle's face. And do you, Danielle Ward, take James Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Danielle's voice rang out clear and strong. With all my heart. Katie bounced excitedly as she watched her father and new mother exchange rings. At 6 years old, she had already started calling Danielle Mom, and her piano playing was becoming more impressive by the day. After the ceremony during the reception, Desiree found a quiet moment with her sister. Remember when we thought sharing Marcus's job was our only chance at happiness? She asked. Danielle laughed, resting her hand on her growing belly. We were so desperate back then, so scared of never having enough. And now look at us, both married, both having babies, both successful in our own ways, both being completely ourselves, Danielle added. No more pretending, no more switching places. Although, Desiree grinned, we could probably still fool people if we wanted to. Never. Again, Danielle said firmly, but she was smiling. I'm too happy being me to ever want to be anyone else. The sisters watched as their husbands chatted across the room. Marcus was showing James some pictures on his phone, probably more photos of Michael, who had become his father's favorite. Subject, did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Danielle asked softly. Never, but I'm so glad we did. Mrs. Hughes appeared with baby Michael, who had woken up from his nap. I believe someone is hungry, she said, handing him to Desiree. As Desiree cradled her son, she saw Marcus watching them with pure love in his eyes. He excused himself from his conversation with James and came to join them. Everything okay? He asked, touching Michael's cheek gently. Everything's perfect, Desiree assured him. I was just thinking about how lucky we are. We make our own luck, Marcus said, through honesty, hard work, and love. The celebration continued into the evening. Danielle played the piano, performing a piece she had composed for her new family. James, Katie, and the baby on the way. James surprised everyone by joining her for a duet, revealing that he had been taking secret lessons. "They're going to be so happy," Marcus said as he and Desiree danced slowly to the music. "They already are," Desiree replied. "Just like we are." Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the newlyweds had left for their honeymoon, Desiree stood in the nursery watching Michael sleep. Marcus found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Penny, for your thoughts, Mrs. Bennet?" "I was thinking about legacies," she said, "about what we pass on to our children. I want Michael to grow up knowing the value of honesty, of being true to himself." "He will," Marcus assured her. "He'll learn from our story, how love and truth conquered all our past mistakes. And maybe," Desiree smiled, "he'll have a little sister soon to share that legacy with." Marcus turned her to face him. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? I took a test this morning. We're having another baby." Marcus's face lit up with joy as he pulled her close. "I love you so much," he whispered. "You and our growing family." "I love you too," Desiree said. "Thank you for giving us the chance to build this life together." In his crib, Michael stirred slightly, and both parents went to check on him. As they stood there watching their son sleep, Desiree felt complete. This was what happiness felt like. Not the fake happiness they had once tried to create through deception, but real, honest joy. Across town, in their new home, Danielle and James were starting their own chapter. Katie was finally her daughter, their new baby, was on the way, and her music school was helping children discover the joy of music every day. The Ward twins had started their journey trying to share one life. Instead, they had found the courage to live two separate but equally beautiful lives, connected by love, truth, and the unbreakable bond of family. And as the stars twinkled over the city that night, two sisters, one in her husband's mansion and one in her new family home, looked up at the same sky and smiled, knowing that sometimes the most twisted paths could lead to the straightest truths, and that love, when it was real and honest, could overcome any obstacle. Their father would have been proud of them, not for the deception they had once attempted, but for the women they had become, strong, successful, and most importantly, true to themselves. The end.